نريد لبنان ملتقى وفاق عربي.
Good afternoon. You're watching the English newscast here on Future Television. I'm Linda Tabuna, and these are today's headlines. The UN expresses alarm over reports of atrocities against civilians as the battle for Aleppo enters its final phase with Syrian government forces. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi reveals the identity of the suicide bomber who carried out the attack that killed 24 Christians during Sunday Mass at a Cairo chapel. And U.S. President-elect Donald Trump nominates ExxonMobil chairman and chief executive Rex Tillerson as the next U.S. Secretary of State. UN Chief Ban Ki-moon has expressed alarm over reports of atrocities against civilians as the battle for Aleppo entered its final phase with Syrian government forces on the verge of retaking all remaining rebel-held areas of the city. Activists in Aleppo have reported summary executions as pro-government forces enter districts once under control of the opposition. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says at least 60 opposition members have been killed.
In all, as of yesterday evening, we've received reports of pro-government forces killing at least 82 civilians, including 11 women and 13 children, in 4 different neighborhoods. That's Bustan al-Qasr, al-Fadus, Al-Khalasa and Al-Salahin. The only way to alleviate the deep foreboding and suspicion that massive crimes may be underway both within Aleppo and in relation to some of those who fled or were captured, whether fighters or civilians, is for there to be monitoring by external bodies, such as the UN.
I'm interested when we are given access. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Just perhaps a few additional points to what in these hours looked like a complete meltdown of humanity in Aleppo. We also, of course, reiterate our extreme concern for the safety and security of those trapped still in the remaining neighborhoods controlled by opposition in eastern Aleppo.
Those were specific individuals who were reported to us as having been killed. Obviously, there could well be more. There could be many more. We simply don't know. And one's fears have to be very high for those who still remain, from the bombardment as well as from any other kind of killing, being shot or detained or tortured.
Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi says a suicide bomber carried out the attack that killed 24 Christians during Sunday Mass at a Cairo chapel adjacent to St. Mark's Cathedral, the seat of Egypt's ancient Coptic Orthodox Church. It was among the deadliest attacks to ever target Egypt's Coptic minority, which makes up about 10% of the country's population, and which was perceived to have supported the military overthrow of an elected Islamist president in 2013. Since then, armed groups have carried out scores of attacks, mainly targeting the security forces, while the government has waged a wide-scale crackdown on dissent. Speaking after a state funeral for the victims, Sisi identified the bomber as 22-year-old Mahmoud Shafiq Muhammad Mustafa and said 3 men and a woman were arrested in connection with the attack, which also wounded 49 people. A Free Patriotic Movement delegation has called for a committee to hammer out a new parliamentary election law. The committee would include representatives of all of Lebanon's political parties and will be tasked with coming up with an election law ahead of the May 2017 parliamentary elections. The FPM announced its proposal after meeting with Prime Minister-designate Saad Hariri and shortly after Kataib Chief Sami Jmail called on Speaker Nabih Berri to open parliamentary deliberations for the adoption of a new electoral law. Today's meeting is part of an FPM initiative to meet with all of Lebanon's political factions to press a proposal to separate the cabinet formation process from attempts to approve a new electoral law. MP Ibrahim Kanaan, who headed the FPM delegation, stressed that the FPM opposes another extension of Parliament's term, as well as the 1960 electoral law. Coming up next, British scientists are trying to figure out whether life on Mars is or was ever possible. Stay tuned. Welcome back. The British sterling rose as investors awaited British inflation data for November, held by Finance Minister Philip Hammond's comments supporting a staggered transition period for the country's exit from the EU. British inflation hit a more than two-year high last month, pushed up by more expensive clothing and the impact of June's Brexit vote on the prices paid by consumers for technology goods. David Poller reports.
Brexit Britain may have lost its taste for Europe, but it hasn't gone off its food. Specialist delis in London stocking up for the Christmas rush. UK consumers, a new survey says, spend more than their EU neighbours. Households averaging £50,000 a year compared to £35,000 in France.
Great British consumer has come out fighting. That's good for the economy. It's kept the economy going post the referendum. The bad thing is that we have a very low savings ratio, much lower than in other European countries. And I think that makes us vulnerable to any slowdown in the economy.
And vulnerable to rising prices. New data shows UK inflation at 1.2% last month, a two-year high. Clothing up strongly and tech goods as brands like Apple seek to recoup losses from a Brexit-weakened sterling. After an OPEC production cut, fuel prices too look ready to climb.
We are in a bit of a phony war after the EU referendum. Many observers expected there to be an immediate impact on economic activity in the UK, and clearly we've not seen that. It will all seem a lot more real when we move into 2017, and maybe businesses and individuals will become a bit more nervous about spending in the way that they have in the second half of 2016.
The UK government wants to trigger separation with the EU by the end of March. By then, inflation could be on its way to the 2.8% the Bank of England predicts for 2018. UK consumers expect that rate even earlier, in November next year. Mouth-watering imports may soon have eye-watering prices to match.
Moving on to the U.S., President-elect Donald Trump has formally announced ExxonMobil Chairman and Chief Executive Rex Tillerson as his nomination to serve as U.S. Secretary of State. The Republican leader said his tenacity, broad experience, and deep understanding of geopolitics make him an excellent choice for Secretary of State. He will promote regional stability and focus on the core national security interests of the United States. In an accompanying statement, Tillerson said he was honored by his selection and shares Trump's vision for restoring the credibility of the United States foreign relations and advancing the country's national security. Well, still speaking of Trump, the U.S. president-elect won't be making an announcement this week about how he plans to step back from his massive business holdings. His spokesman says a previously scheduled press conference will be postponed until January. Eve Johnston reports.
If you're waiting to see how Donald Trump plans to juggle his business empire with America's top job, you'll have to wait a little longer. The president-elect on Monday pushing back a news conference scheduled for December 15th. He'll be spilling the details on the fate of the Trump Organization next month instead, sometime before his January 20th inauguration. Trump's hotels and golf resorts stretch around the world from Panama to Scotland. He's also got a winery and a modeling agency. Trump's been cagey about whether he plans to sell his holdings outright, although legal experts say that's the only way he'll be able to avoid massive conflicts of interest. Meanwhile, it seems he's finally made up his mind about who he wants for top diplomat, saying on Twitter that he'll be announcing his pick for Secretary of State on Tuesday. An inside source telling Reuters he's chosen Rex Tillerson, ExxonMobil's CEO, whose cozy ties with Russia have stirred controversy. Democrats and Republicans saying he would face a battle in getting confirmed.
Scientists working at Europe's best-equipped surface analysis laboratory want to unlock one of space's great secrets. Was there or is there any life on Mars? Jim Drury reports.
It's a question that fascinates us. Is there life on Mars? These Newcastle University scientists hope to provide an answer using their engineering and analysis laboratory, arguably the most advanced of its type in Europe.
The instrument behind me is really an extremely good microscope operating with helium ions instead of light, which enables you to focus those helium ions so well that you can get basically nanometer resolution, so we're almost on the point of seeing individual atoms that way. But this instrument over here gives a lot more. This is a secondary ion mass spectrometer. It works by firing very high energetic ions at the sample surface. Those energetic ions, when they hit the sample, throw up a lot of secondary ions or secondary atoms, and we then analyze that in this long time-of-flight analyzer chamber.
Researchers have already analysed these 200-million-year-old microscopic tunnels in basalt rocks and found evidence of life. Suboceanic basalt has similar properties to rock found on Mars. The next step is to analyse Martian rock.
What we intend to do is have a look at some of the rocks that may be available from NASA, which date back to a time when Mars was much warmer and wetter, and have a look at some of the structures and chemical signatures that we see in those rocks.
Until now, such analysis has been hard because Martian meteorites picked up biological molecules on their way through Earth's atmosphere. But Newcastle's new facility makes scientists confident of success.
If we can show that life arose independently on two neighbouring planets, then we can demonstrate that life is probably very common throughout the galaxy, possibly the universe. And if that's true, why aren't we seeing any aliens here right now?
The team's basalt research was published in the Journal of Vacuum Science and Technology.
The blasphemy trial for Indonesia's top Christian official has begun amid heavy security and protests. Jakarta Governor Basuki Cahayapurnama is accused of insulting the Quran in remarks that sparked outrage in the world's largest Muslim-majority country. More details in this report.
Indonesia's top Christian official standing trial for blasphemy on Tuesday. The governor of capital city Jakarta accused of insulting the Quran. Basuki Cahayapurnama's trial seen as a test of religious freedom in the world's largest Muslim-majority country. He had made the comment during a political campaign back in September, stirring rage across the country and sparking the biggest protests Jakarta has seen in almost 20 years. His trial on Tuesday drawing a crowd chanting, "God is great," outside the courthouse.
We want him put under arrest immediately and then jailed. That will serve justice for all Muslims.
Purnama has apologized for the remark and said he didn't mean to be insulting. His spokesman putting on a confident face ahead of the trial.
We don't have to worry. They can say whatever they like. We didn't do anything wrong, so we don't have to be afraid.
Purnama faces 5 years in prison if found guilty, and the odds seem stacked against him. Nearly all blasphemy cases over the past few years have ended in a conviction.
This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now for a recap of our top stories. The UN expresses alarm over reports of atrocities against civilians as the battle for Aleppo enters its final phase with Syrian government forces. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi reveals the identity of the suicide bomber who carried out the attack that killed 24 Christians during Sunday Mass at a Cairo chapel. And U.S. President-elect Donald Trump nominates ExxonMobil Chairman and Chief Executive Rex Tillerson as the next U.S. Secretary of State. Those are your top stories for this Tuesday. I'm Linda Tamimina. Thank you all for watching us.
نريد لبنان ملتقى وفاق عربي